Welcome back to another episode of the Money Class Podcast. On this episode, Kosta and I talk about what the global pandemic has taught us about our lives and the world around us. This is episode 15 of the Money Class Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Money Class Podcast. My name is Kosta.
And this is still Marc.
Always the same people.
Always the same people, exactly. Hopefully our names don't change too much, though.
Who knows, you know? We can't predict the future.
No, we cannot predict the future, but we can control a bit of our future. Maybe, if we don't live in a too deterministic world, though. If we think that we have a certain control on what our fate is.
Well, you know, with that being said, interestingly enough, today's episode is on COVID and what COVID has taught us in our lives, especially as students, starting off our lives, and how we can come out of this, I guess you could say, more knowledgeable about our own, I guess, existence and future and where we can go from there.
Yeah, that's very existential. You know, we spoke about post-corona a few weeks ago, and we were talking with teachers and we're talking people in different industries and really trying to get an understanding about what they think is happening and how their lives have been changing. But how have students' lives have changed? You know, what have I discovered about myself? What have you discovered about yourself? And what do we think we're heading going forward? Because there's been such a paradigm shift in the way that we're living our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say, okay, so here's the thing about, can we start more going back to how we were as people pre-pandemic and how our perspective was like, and then kind of see how that shifted as things were happening starting in March with the shutdowns moving forward. So you want to start and kind of give your perspective or your point of view?
Yeah, so I think, absolutely. So before the pandemic, I was on exchange in Singapore, and I had left Montreal on January 1st and only returned, I believe it was April, I think it was mid-April, April 4th or April 10th, which is when I returned. So we've been living in Singapore, we were living with the pandemic, essentially with COVID, as of the end of January. I remember the first time I really saw a mask being used not because you're sick or not because of air quality was really during Chinese New Year, when I was traveling to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, on one of the many weekend trips I was taking in Southeast Asia. Now look, the reason I can do that was because the prices were so cheap. You take a flight, you take a bus, it costs you $40, $50, $100, round trip to Bali type of thing. Right, so it's a no-brainer to do that. And I think, that's the way that I was living. I was living in a way that was very high on consumption, right? The consumption wasn't very expensive, but the consumption was omnipresent. It was always, where are we going next? What restaurant are we going to? What bar are we going to go to? Where are we going to visit? What temple are we going to visit? There were so many things we were doing. We were always thinking ahead, and very rarely were we stopping and saying, whoa, let's see where we are now, right? Mm-hmm. We were taking it for granted that we had this liberty to go anywhere we wanted to without even a second thought, and that's really the shift in our mindset, the shift in my mindset, post Corona, or at least when Corona came about. So as Singapore was a leader in Southeast Asia and was a leader in the world in the way that they contained and the way that they dealt with COVID. Well, we had very progressive measures, right? First, it was classrooms with 50 students and more that were at home. Then it was classrooms with 25 students and more that were at home. Then it was 10 students with more that were at home. Gyms stayed open at limited capacity. Then gyms were closed, and then they were only open with personal trainers. And then it was full-on shutdown. And then as we started opening up, there were masks that were being used everywhere in public spaces, even indoors. There was no controversy. People were listening to the measures, right? So I think my perspective is very different because I started COVID in an exemplary manner where I saw the social wealth that a country had and how I was able to leverage that in order to contain the pandemic, while also me coming to the realization that, whoa, I've been living in a very high consumption way. Is this something that's normal and is something that's sustainable? How about you, Kosta?
So yeah.
You think you were in Montreal, I think.
Yes. I'll give my context, but I have a lot to say about your own experience. But yeah, I was essentially in Montreal. I was, very much, my identity was literally student. That was it. Very one-dimensional. I was going to the library, going to my classes, doing my work. I had my clubs, head down, always studying. I was just like, let me get a good GPA. Let me really pump up my CV. That was my life, right? And that's all I was doing. And it was really about planning stuff. I remember in, I guess, like the fall semester of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, before everything shut down, I had agendas planning out the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of my life. And I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to hit that, and then I'm going to be able to do that. It was like very, very meticulous. And the thing was, everything was working well. I had no issues, reaching my goals, and I had no issues, planning ahead and actually, like, for the most part, things were going my way, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And then the pandemic hit. And from that one-dimensional self, I know it's very philosophical, but by that one-dimensional identity that had built up for me, striving to do things and always like expecting things in the future based on my achievements, I realized that so much of it was all in my head, and so much of it was just this like thing I built up for myself, and I never stopped to realize, I never stopped to question reality, right? I never stopped to just pause and take a breather, pause and realize, like, who am I? What's going on around me? Like, that whole thing, that whole mentality shifted when things started to close. And I became a lot more of a thinker and less of a just a box checker, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So that was my experience with a pandemic. And in Montreal, around me, things were going well, like you mentioned.
You guys were hoarding toilet paper pretty fast.
Well, yeah, that I was gonna get to that.
Things aren't going that great.
Here, with the difference with schools, we heard everything on the news. Nothing really changed. I mean, you would see the occasional person wearing a mask in the metro or the subway for people not from Montreal.
This was in like February, March, like beginning of March, or this was
February, beginning of March, and like everybody was just like. They would look at that person and almost be like, okay, calm down, buddy. Like, this is just like this propaganda news, like, coverage. Like, it's not that bad. And we were all kind of in denial because, like, the government wasn't taking any measures, right? And then they took the measures and everybody realized how serious this was. So schools didn't go from, 30 students to 20 to 10. It was just no more school, everybody go home. And we were like, whoa, okay. And after that, we thought it was going to be a 2-week like pause, so they can kind of like take the measures necessary. But it became a 1-year pause, and everything shifted online. And gyms, it was very much again, everything halted really fast. Just one day it was open, one day it was closed. And the big trend, as everybody knows, in America and in Canada, was the famous toilet paper. For some reason, everybody hoarded toilet paper as if that was all that mattered because everybody thought it was the apocalypse. And instead of hoarding on food, I don't know why toilet paper was important. But yeah, that's what happened in Montreal, and that's kind of what happened with my own, I guess, self.
Yeah, so you said you wanted to come. You wanted to mention something that I had spoken about.
So you spoke about consumption. Oh, I forgot where I was going with this. But essentially, you spoke about consumption. You spoke about how you were, going out there doing your thing, kind of, you were basically living your own life, and you were having a blast because you were in Singapore as an exchange student. A big theme here, consumption, kind of planning ahead, always thinking about where you wanted to go, very much similar to me, and I think this applies to everyone in the world. Going in a halt, we become less kinetic and more, I guess you could say, how do I put this?
Not kinetic energy, but potential energy.
No. I say kinetic because it's like, kinetic just means moving in the sense of like, it's like the physics, it's like you're always moving. You're like shaking these atoms, and then you're at home and you're just like, you're sitting there and you're standing still and you have to face your own self in the mirror. And I just want to say it's like you went through that too, but it was on a different way, but it still happened more gradually. And that's what I have to say. It's like everybody had a very similar experience, no matter where you were in the world. Whether it was you in Singapore or me in Montreal, I'm sure someone in South Africa or someone in Pakistan. A lot of it was similar, more or less. I'm sure Pakistan, the measures are different, but you know what I mean? More or less, we all had that same perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's very true because you're living a life always planning ahead, right? Always, what's the next thing you're gonna have? Well, what's the next restaurant you're gonna go to? What are the next plans? You're still hanging out with a friend and you're already making plans to see them again, right? And I think that's kind of the unhealthy trend we were going towards was always thinking almost too ahead, right? And there's a value to foreseeing things, and there's a value to looking ahead because that allows you to plan. But sometimes that takes away from your actual ability to focus on what's happening now and enjoy the moment that you're living at the time that you're living it. And I think that's a big thing that I've learned. It's that, and it's exactly that. It's live in the moment, cherish what you're experiencing now, because what you're experiencing now may be something that's a crazy thought in some future, right? Never would I have thought that going to the gym or going to the library or going to a physical class was something that would be taken away from me, right? And the only parallel I could think is, we think of people who have disabilities in terms of maybe their arms aren't functional, maybe their legs aren't functional, they're paralyzed. Well, never do you ever think that this is something that's going to happen to you. So you take it for granted, right? We go running, we go walking, we don't think about what we're doing just because it's something we're so used to. And with the pandemic, and then when you end up, paralyzed or something happens to you, well, all of a sudden you never acknowledged or you never appreciated the liberty that you had before. And I think that's something that COVID has taught us. It's that while we're having so much fun, while we're partying, let's remember where we are and let's remember how lucky we are to have been able to do so, and not just always think in the future, but think in terms of enjoying the moment now. And I think that's a big thing and a big realization that I've come to. And I think it's a blessing that we've had this at a young age, even though it may be hurting in the short term. I really believe, and I really hope that this is true, that going forward we're going to be so much more appreciative of every small moment, of every interaction, of the little things like going to the library, going to class, that we just dismissed as whatever back maybe a year ago.
Yeah, essentially the simple moments, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's interesting because I would go to the library and I didn't think twice of it, and now I look back at the time and I'm like, whoa. I was at the library. There were people around me. I could go at any time. Whoa, I would go. Sometimes I'd wake up at 4 a.m. to go study for an exam that I had at 9 p.m. And that was beautiful to me. That was a power I had. And now I can't do that. But you see that simple thing that now you look back at and you're like, wow. And now you can look at your own environment now and be more thankful of what you have, right? That's how I feel. We are very lucky to be in a place like Canada, in a place like, in the class system we're in compared to literally the other 7 billion people who might have been affected on a much larger level, especially those in poverty in other countries, right? So those are things that we take for granted that I'm sure you did too, you think more about now, especially with the pandemic. People losing their businesses too, people struggling financially. There was so much that went into it that was much larger than, I guess, just the psychological. It was the financial. It was literally everything in our lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you bring up an interesting point when we were talking about planning, and it's something that made me think thoroughly, and it's to always have a backup plan, right? It's always to think that whatever something happens, that may not turn out how you wish, right? And you spoke about business going under. If all your eggs are in one basket, and this, in that case, if that basket falls or that basket breaks, then you're going to really be in a dire situation. Right, that's in personal finances. That's why we talk about investing in a diversified portfolio so much. Is that if a certain company goes bankrupt, if a certain company has difficulties, well, at least not all your eggs are in one basket. Right, that's why I don't believe in the YOLO mentality. You only live once. Invest everything in one place, and if it goes up 20% or 100%, then yay you. But if that goes down 90%, you're not going to be as happy. And that's exactly how I see the future and how you should make your plans. Right, the summer 2020 rather, I was supposed to be in New York interning at a big bank, and never in the million years would I have thought that my entering the U.S. would be something that I wouldn't be able to do. So I was forced to come up with a backup plan on the spot. Had I thought of it maybe before that there would be a global pandemic, I would have been able to plan better. But I think that was something that's a bit unrealistic. Though the lesson is that whenever you have something, think of plan B, think of plan C, because plan A may not always occur, even if at the moment it's 100% certainty.
There's something magical though about this. This summer you mentioned you were supposed to be in New York at a big bank. I was supposed to be in South Africa learning coding at a boot camp, and then subsequently going at an internship and kind of like implementing my knowledge in Python and all of those like learning like software languages. And that completely switched to me literally being stuck in Montreal, hating my life, but like, you know, quote unquote, I'm being dramatic here, but more like understanding like, you know, that extreme of like where I was supposed to be versus where I am at. And a lot of beautiful things came out of that though. You know, being in Montreal in the summer, not having all of these quote unquote obligations or like commitments that I had set up for myself, I was able to go ahead and do things I liked more because we had so much free time. I was able to start a YouTube channel because I wanted to learn how to edit. I was able to read more books that I would have not have read what I have been in South Africa. You know, all of these things that I think, you know, enriched a part of me that that I would not have enriched if it was for the other situation. So that's something
That's true.
To talk about. I hear a lot about, I know YouTube because I started a YouTube channel. I hear a lot about creative people who didn't have the time to do creative stuff pre-pandemic, and now were able to take, because they didn't have to go anywhere, they were stuck at home, they were able to take that time and be very creative and kind of like start their own companies online. People had started YouTube channels. I think YouTube had a record amount of people who like reached 100,000 subscribers, to a point where it's become common now to like meet someone in the street that has like a lot of subscribers. I'm talking about this because like I'm more knowledgeable on this thing, but it's because people had more time to be creative.
Yeah.
And all of our passion projects almost took the front seat for a bit, and that was beautiful.
Yeah, that's important of having a passion project. That's important of having, you know, a backup plan. Is that at least you have a driver, you have something coming from inside you that pushes you and that forces you to be creative and force you to think outside the box and to be able to take your own fate into your own hands, right? And I think that's an important part of it. And also, you know, the way that we interact with sometimes the way that we interact with certain events or certain confirmations or at least certain opportunities are a bit too early. And that's something that I was able to, that I witnessed, but also a lesson that I was able to take out from COVID. And that is, I guess that was my second lesson from COVID, was that don't celebrate too early, right? Wait for confirmations, and even then, have a backup plan, right? And I think I think, you know, we're humans, we want to celebrate, we think something's going to happen. Okay, let's celebrate like it actually happened. Well, that may create a high, but also, you know, the down after is going to be pretty, you know, it's going to be pretty strong. So that's really the second thing that I really learned was, you know, don't celebrate too early, right? Wait for things to be confirmed. Wait for there to be 100% certainty. You know, Kosta, we were just on the phone with a few lawyers who work in intellectual property and patents who will be on the show next week. But you know, they were talking about you have a patent, right? Don't start talking about it to everyone, right? Don't celebrate your brand new idea before you even have a patent, before you even trademarked your company name or whichever, because now, you know, you're in competition. Now the other person can go and one up you and get the patent before you, and all of a sudden you're gonna have so much litigation in order to be able to come back to square one had you kept your mouth shut.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. Scott Galloway, a guy we talked about in a few of our episodes, famous professor from NYU for those who don't know, in marketing. He talked about how in 1999, when there was the .com boom and then subsequently the .com crash, he at some point he had so much money from his company that he was in the process of, you know, looking for a jet to buy for himself and running for senator. Then the crash came and everything got wiped off, and like he basically lost everything in the matter of a few, a few stock market
few weeks,
falls.
Yeah.
And through that and then later on in 2008, he unexpectedly found out that he was going to have a kid, and he was like not ready for that, and 2018 wiped up again a lot of his net worth. Right? And all of these things made him realize that, you know, when you think you're at the top, or when you think things are going amazing, they're never going as amazing as they actually are. And when things are going bad, they're never going as bad as they actually are. Because after the .com boom crash, he was able to build his own company, crashed again in 2008, build his own company again, and now he's sustainable. who knows, maybe until the other crash, unless he found a way to, like, work against that. But you see, my point is, like, when things are bad, they're never as bad as they are. When things are good, they're never as good as they are. I think that's a very important thing. You're not some, for most of us, we're not Jay-Z, we're not Dwayne Johnson, we're not, Britney Spears. But at the same time, we're not, like, I don't want to say it like this, but we're not, like, the bottom of the society, the biggest failure of, like, our country. Like, it's never like that. And I want to emphasize that.
Yeah, we're students. We have ambitions. We have ambitions that are attainable. We have certain goals. We have certain passions that we're able to bring out. And I think anyone who's listening to this podcast has access to their phone, to their internet, to whichever device that they're listening this onto. So as bad as the world may be going, you still have a certain comfort. You still have a certain amount of luck that you're either born into or that you were able to create for yourself. And as a result, you're able to live a certain life, and if you're able to do that self-made, then 100%. I commend you, and I would applaud that effort, and I would applaud that being able to do so, but also to be conscious of where you are and where you stand, right? Because, like you said, when things are going well, you think they're going, you think that they're going well, but in reality, they're going so much better than what you actually think. And then the opposite and then the exact same trend happens on the flip side when things aren't going as well. And I think another thing
I just want to mention a point that my point there was, we like to think in extremes when in reality it's never that. We're like always somewhere in between, right? Mm-hmm. Not amazing, we're good. Not bad, we're just not that good. And it's just a matter of rebalancing things. Okay. But yeah, exactly what you said.
Yeah, and that kind of we'll switch subjects a bit for the third thing that COVID has taught me, and that is social interactions are more important than we think. And I could go about that, but would you like to? I kind of brought it up. What would you have to say about that, Kosta?
COVID made me realize that before I took for granted the fact that I would be at school and I would bump into a friend and just go get a coffee at a coffee shop or just talk for 10-15 minutes in the hallways and then continue with my day. And that little interaction, I didn't realize how important it was to just give me like life, in the sense where we are social animals. That is so important to who we are as people. And then the contrast when we had everything closed down and we're like seeing the same four walls every day and not going out, and understanding how it can affect you psychologically and mentally, because you only see your parents or whatever. Like, that was really powerful, and it made me acknowledge how great these small interactions were that were serendipitous in a way, but also going out and seeing my own friends like you and everybody else we hang out with, and just going and having Korean barbecue downtown because that's fun, or just going out and hanging out at someone's house because we just want to have a Saturday night. That is beautiful, and I can't wait for us to go back to that, because that was so crucial to just our sanity, but also just experiencing life to the fullest. I love that.
And sometimes we would say, oh no, I don't feel like it, I want to stay in it. And I think, I don't know if we'll be saying that very often in the next few years, but it's just a question of, we never put it on a pedestal. We never thought that it was such a big thing because it was something that we took for granted, right? These social interactions, these bumping into random people and going out for lunch with them. Bumping into them in school and saying let's go for lunch. It was never something that was such a awe-inspiring moment, right? It was just that's normal, let's do that. And what the pandemic has shown me is that while that was an incredible blessing to do so, it wasn't always a certainty, as it is not a certainty now. So any interaction we have now is that much more important, right? Whether it be texting a friend, calling a friend, doing a video chat. That's what's keeping us grounded. That's what's keeping us alive. That's what's keeping us working forward, because we don't have these inconspicuous moments that arise from meeting this person at a Starbucks lineup or in school or anywhere else.
Yeah, I think even our teacher Valerie Camille, who we had on the podcast a few episodes ago, she talked about how, like, the beauty of having her kids, the kids in her classroom, and just seeing a kid walk in with a Red Bull and being like, oh, that's not good for you. Let's, like, pull up a YouTube video.
PSA, exactly. Stop the class, stop everything. This
exactly. you see, these things you can't have when you're on Zoom, and it's like very much a thing that happens in real life. Like these little details that we can't have through Zoom interaction. I mean, even what's his name, the CEO of Zoom, was like, "I having too many Zooms during the day. I can't. This is unhealthy." And that's funny for him to say like that.
It's ironic.
There's some truth to it. Like this is not necessarily like as powerful or as a connection as like us being in person. But there's also, you know, there is very much like, there is very much, I guess, a need or just like a plus to having these technologies to help us out, like Zoom. It's just not the same.
No, that's true. That's true. I agree with you. You know, these technologies pave a certain path, but it's our, you know, it's us to decide where this path leads to. Right, so while the technology is a tool, the tool is not going to build a house for you. It'll make it easier, but it's not the solution, and it's not the end all be all. That's what's happening. So I think that's, you know, what Valerie was kind of pointing towards when she was talking about that, and what we're talking about right now is exactly that about Zoom. Right, you could have it on a computer and not be on a video chat, but it takes your willpower, and it takes you to say, oh, okay, I want to speak to someone because I value this social interaction so much. So let me do so. Let me take the first step. Yeah, so we're back. So actually, that brings me to my next point. And, you know, talking about social interactions, talking about how we interact with others. And that is, be humble. You don't know as much as you think. So listen to the experts. Listen to the ones who devote their career to something. Listen to the ones who are passionate about something and know and have a specific knowledge above the median, because when you're passionate about something, you'll intrinsically want to learn more and be better and be the best. So listen to them. Be humble. Be able to say, I don't know something about this, and teach me. Mm-hmm. Because during the pandemic, many people became epidemiologists. Many people became doctors. Many people became every single hat that they had. Right?
Yeah.
And especially in medicine, which was quite particular, but that's a different oddity that I won't speak about. But it just that is that, you know, you have to be able to be humble enough to say, I don't know much about this, but that's fine, right? I'm willing to put myself in a vulnerable position and say, yeah, I will listen to you by virtue of the life of the work that you've put in order to become an expert in this field.
Yeah, interestingly enough, again, I think we brought up on another episode, right? Always be the intern. It doesn't matter if you're Pitbull and you have the number one hit in the country, and you literally can walk into any record label and they will take your meeting in a second. Always be the intern. There's always something to learn from a field you're not a part of. You can't always be the expert, but you can always learn something, right? I personally think that generalizing in the world is very valuable, right? There's this thing where you should be a general specialist. Maybe you're a specialist in the few things that you work on in your actual job in your field, but you can be a generalist in everything else, right? You find a certain topic very interesting. It might be a medical topic, and you're like an art student, but hey, you can go in and actually learn from the experts. You can open a book. Doesn't mean you become you're not a doctor if you do that, but at least you know more about that topic, and that's really good, right? So
you become a bit more knowledgeable in something you knew absolutely nothing about, and that's Einstein's like genius theory, or at least the what is it, the curve of intelligence versus. So pretty much the curve goes on the x-axis, it's how much you actually know, and on the y-axis it's how much you think you know. And at first it's like it peaks, because as soon as you start learning about something, you're like, oh wow, I know everything about a subject. And then the more you actually learn about the subject at hand, the more you realize how little you know. Right, so I may think I know everything about chemistry because I know the ideal gas law. Well, that's going to be me at the peak of it, and then all of a sudden I notice, well, that's not the only part about chemistry. So then it just goes down, and what my conception of what I know falls, but while I'm also learning at the same time, so it then slowly trends upwards.
Yeah, it's a way of putting it is you tend to simplify things in real life, and then the more you dive deep into it, you realize how complex certain things can actually become, right?
Yeah.
That's you're very right there. I think that I forget what you called it. Einstein's what?
It's Einstein's. It's not the theory, but it's just
I know
it's
it's the graph
on how on how much you actually know versus how much you think you know.
I'll actually put it in the description, but I know exactly what Marc is talking about, and yeah, that's very true. I've learned that a lot about when I was starting to learn new skills, and that's very important.
How was that when you started when you started editing? Were you like, oh yeah, I know how to do everything, or did you have a reality check?
Well, not just editing; it was even like learning math for my economics courses, which I'm horrible at math, and I'm doing an economics degree, but I feel like I want to challenge myself, and I'm actually trying to learn, and it's like something I'm like really going deep in. And in high school I thought I was amazing, and then I went into CJIP and I'm like, hold on a second, math is hard, calculus is hard for me at least. And then I did I progressed, and I got into more complex topics in the topic of mathematics, and I realized how much I didn't know, even though it was easy at some point. And it's about really working hard on that topic. But editing, same thing. I went in at first. I'm the type of person who's really scared about anything I start doing in the beginning, like everyone is, I'm sure. You start doing something, you're kind of scared because you don't know where to start. Then you start it. You think you have it all figured out. And that's where you kind of get sucked into the entire world of how can I be better? Let me Google 20 different editing tips and topics that I don't know about. And that's where, the whole I don't know a lot comes into play.
Yeah, but then you take kind of the knowledge, because that's another rabbit hole that you could fall victim of, and that is learning so much about a subject before you actually execute, right? Like if you want to learn, when you want to pick up photography, there are millions of videos on YouTube with thousands of views saying that, or with millions of views in themselves, on how to shoot the perfect portrait, the perfect landscape, get your lighting right, get your color correction, do this. It's like, whoa, why don't you actually go outside and take a picture? And apply the knowledge that you're learning in small doses, right? Like, I'm not going to try to, if I want to build a house, I'm not going to watch a YouTube video, or at least I'm not going to learn, well, maybe I should learn how to do it from A to Z, but I have to learn it in parts, right? Learn the excavation, learn the foundation, learn bringing up the walls, learn how to insulate, learn how to do roofing. Don't learn it all at once, because you're going to be confused. There's so many moving parts, and the complexity of anything is exponential, right? You could take your phone and take a video, and take a picture rather, and that's relatively low complex, but then you could change the white balance and change the ISO and change the shutter speed, and all of a sudden you're adding complexities. But it doesn't always have to be so complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, we like to complicate things for the sake of it sometimes. Sometimes we could make it simple. It's fine. It's fine to be humble. Say, I don't need all these complexities. Let me watch 2 YouTube videos on how to take a nice picture. Let me try it. Let me go back home. Let me watch a video. Let me try something else. Let me watch another video. Let me try something else. But don't become a hyper general. Don't become a specialist generalist.
No, again, there's a difference. Being a specialized generalist, it's good when you're like, you couple 2 fields that you're really passionate about that don't go together, and then you make that your career. Being a lawyer in computer science, in the computer science field. You have a computer science degree and you have a law degree. Very special. Not a lot of people do that. But then when you start doing 10 different subjects and you try and specialize in 10 different fields, you're just going to be average in everything. You're not going to be amazing in 10 things.
Fair enough.
I think that's where we're coming about. And to tie this back to what we learned about the pandemic and like how this applies, I think it's all about, us taking the time to learn new skills, having so much time on our hands that now when we try and be productive, try and do new things, we have the internet in front of us, and we can, order a book from Amazon, or we could, read an article that's on the topic. And I think this could teach us a lot, but, we're not all doctors also.
No. Some of us are, but not all.
Not exactly. But you see what I'm saying here, right? It's enjoy learning, just don't think you're an expert if you actually are not. It just sounds obvious, but I don't think it is for a lot of people.
No, and I think it takes a great amount of humility and a great amount of self-awareness to say, look, I know I'm not good in this. Let me seek assistance. Let me ask someone for help, and I think that's what COVID has taught me. The micro level is, or at least a very specific case, is the mask wearing, which I would have never thought was that effective. But then you see the results, and you see you see the evidence, and you're like, well, that makes sense. So sure. But I would have never really thought of it much further than that if it wasn't brought up to me by researchers, by scientists, by people who devote their career and it's pretty much their vocation to do so. Right? And I think it's important to say, let me be comfortable with changing my perspectives, because if not, I'm just going to always be in a rabbit hole. Right? Conspiracy theories come about because your values, or at least your conception of reality, is changing, and you refuse to accept this change. So you're looking for alternative reasons that would justify this change beyond what is actually happening, right? So your reality is that people cannot get to the moon. Even if NASA was able to get astronauts to the moon, you're gonna say, no, that's impossible. It's all filmed in Hollywood. Or it's impossible that putting a piece of cloth goes on your face, so it's just the government trying to control us. Like, there's always going to be people denying what's happening, but that's because, and I think that the psychological reason is that it's going against your preconceived notions of reality, so you're just looking for the shortcut as to what would explain this new reality.
I just want to say to the audience listening and watching this, we are not psychology majors. We are just talking we're just curious and kind of like trying to figure out what it could be. So do your own research, because like it would be hypocritical for us to be like, we're not experts, and then we're like, so the psychology behind it is
no, I'm not expert, but this is just like, I took a behavioral finance class, and that's kind of what we spoke about in the scope of finance. On how, when things go against your preconceived notions, it's very difficult to change your mind, right? Then you have emotional biases and you've got cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are the types that you're able to change. It's the type of, I thought that 2 times 2 equals 5, and all of a sudden you show me the calculation that it gives 4, and I'm like, I believe you, right? Simplified. And then emotional biases is now that you have an emotion tied to it. So now it's deeper than just I learned something new. It's deeper than I don't know how to drive a manual car. Now it's all cars are bad because they pollute the environment. So now you've got two different ideas competing against each other. One is more factual and one is more emotional. Each have their merits, but they have different difficulties in changing.
Yeah, it's again, we see this a lot in politics, and I actually read a book on this. It's about how us people, we tend to, the whole idea of quote unquote alternative facts, where it's like two sides trying to find a fact that will justify their, I guess, theories versus actually believing in certain facts. And that's what has been very polarizing in politics. It's like you can never really we can never really debate a certain issue because you both believe in different facts about the issue itself. So your conclusions might be right if you look at your own fact, but maybe depending on which fact is right, that conclusion is right, and it's just very polarizing. So yeah, that's, we talked about this before too, and it's like this polarization of what is right, what is not right. And just really honing down on the actual evidence, and that's been a huge part of what the internet is really, I guess you could say, promoting. And it is unhealthy, but you have to deal with it, right? It's because now our lives is fully on the internet. This is what we do every day. We wake up, we're on a screen, and we go to bed, and we're on a screen again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you brought up facts, and I was looking around because I just had a biology exam, and we spoke about scientific facts. And a fact is an observation of the world around us. So it's very difficult to have alternative facts when you have a certain observation of what's happening around you. You're seeing you see a plant growing. Yeah, the fact is that you water it, you give soil, and you put a human environment that's going to grow faster. The fact is there, right? You're making an observation of what's happening. So that's why the idea of alternative facts and news that feeds on people's fears are pretty much painting picture a different way, right? You're saying, okay, the plant is able to grow Not because you're watering it, not because it has a humid environment, because it's on the third story of my house. Okay. You're making an observation, but what is the merit of this observation?
A thing you could do is look at research. Actually go online and not look at articles which can be biased, either on the right or on the left or wherever you look at, or they can have a very narrowed perspective. Maybe you're looking at an article through a business perspective, but it should be looked at through a scientific perspective. Look at the actual research from the experts, the people who dedicate their lives to that specific topic. Mm-hmm. I think those are the people that should be listened to. Yeah. So that thing with your example with the plant, maybe, whatever they're called, botanical biologists, I forget the name. There's like a specialization.
Yeah.
But they're biologists that look at that specific issue. Go and figure out who studies that, and then go and figure out what research they have on that topic. That's more. Yes. That's how I
see what they're saying.
About it. Exactly.
Yeah. So, do you want to go one last thing, Kosta, that we learned during COVID? Do you want to go it or go with it?
Do you have any last ones?
Yeah, I have a few, but I could let you if you want to bring one.
So, yeah, I didn't necessarily bullet them. You kind of brought up your own, and I kind of commented on them because a lot of it is more general. But, for me, I guess how I would end, and I'll give you the floor after this. It's really about, necessarily focusing on connections, focusing on people more in the future, because I took that for granted pre-pandemic. Not necessarily going about my life in a very one-dimensional way. Kosta, I am not the student. I am Kosta, the human being who likes 20 million things, and he's partly a student, but he's also partly really loves creativity and making films, and I'm really interested in XYZ. That's be three-dimensional in your thinking, and I think what powers that is the fact that you can stop and breathe and really think about who you are, think about what you want to do. That was really important for me. And you can't plan in the future. You could, to some extent. It's good to plan, always having goals, wanting to hit your goals, beautiful. But you can't expect your plan to go 100% your way, because some things are out of your control. But you can always control what you can control. You can always control your environment in the sense, I choose to get out of bed in the morning, and I choose to sit on my desk and do my schoolwork. That is my choice. Now, the fact that a meteorite can come and extinct all of human being, and that is not my choice, but it can happen, So there's that that I guess two-sided I guess you could say, I forget what it's called.
Two sides of the coin?
Exactly, two sides of the coin, that's the expression. Those are the main things for me. I'm sure there are a lot more, but those are the main things that come to mind when it comes to what I've learned in this pandemic and what I want to take with me moving on. How about you?
Yeah, and I think I'll just comment about the last one that you said about putting having your certain goals, but allowing them to change, right? So I teach karate, and a lot of my students, whenever we do a graduation, to another belt, whenever we have the exams and they switch belts, I always tell my students the same thing, right? Remember why you're doing this, right? Remember what your goal is, and if your goal is to have the black belt, well, that may be your grand goal to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years. But in order to do so, you have to set much smaller goals that are more attainable. And you want the black belt. Well, before having that, you need the brown one. Before that, you need the blue one, and then the green one, and the orange one, and etc. And these are easier goals in order to accomplish, in order for you to accomplish your big goal. So what does that really mean in the pandemic, COVID, everything? Well, that means if you want to become a videographer, if you want to become a producer, if you want to become a writer, if you want to become an engineer, if you want to become any professional, that may be your big goal. And you may have many little goals throughout the way in order to get there. Get your grades, do these internships, and go to this school, write on this paper, do this, participate in this research article, travel to this space, meet these people. All these things can change. As long as you keep your end goal in sight, you'll be able to change these medium-term goals because you have a certain foresight, or because you have a certain direction in which you're going, right? I'm gonna want to work in finance. Now, my networking activities got canceled this year, and my internship got canceled last year, and that really sucks. But what you could take out of this and say, look, let me try my best to change these medium-term goals. Let me change these goals that are helping me get to where I want to be, and have a backup plan. Let me be malleable. Let me be able to change, to be pivot, because I know where I want to head, but the way I'm going to head there is different. And that's really what COVID has taught me, whether it be in social interactions, whether it be in goal setting, whether it be in my eventual career or in school. And it's just that. It's that have an end in sight, right? Have the light out of the tunnel, but look around and be conscious that things change, and be okay with that, because things will change.
Before we wrap up, the last thing I want to bring up is the fact that a lot of people are suffering. I've actually wrote a paper on this, suffering psychologically through this pandemic. This isolation is really taking a toll on a lot of people through depression, through consumption, just using a lot of different, like alcohol has gone up, and that might not necessarily be a healthy thing. Like, all of these things have been taking a toll on a lot of people. And the big thing that I've realized through the researchers that I've through the research I've read and through what we could do is, it's really important to realize that it's okay to not be okay. And I don't think it's we have a podcast here about financial literacy, really being responsible, really going out into the world, and what we could do to be successful individuals and what students can learn. But also realize that if you're in a place where you feel shitty, it's okay to not necessarily be okay now. It makes total sense. Don't feel bad that you're not okay. You know what I mean?
That's completely true.
So, don't think you always have to go. You're inside, you're not feeling good, but you got to be productive, blah, blah, blah. No. You have the time now to take a breather. So I think that's really important. And I just wanted to end on that, because everybody's hearing about us wanting to have, doing X, doing Y, our goals are this, are that, what we learned, us analyzing things. So yeah, I think it's also good to take it to the roots.
Yeah, but it's a question of micro versus macro, right? And what's getting me through the pandemic is the macro outlook. It's today's a hard day. Tomorrow, hopefully tomorrow will be better. This morning was difficult to get out of bed. It was difficult to get going, and that's micro adjustments. These are micro events that are happening in your life. Just like on the stock market, you have micro events, right? Intraday, stock may go up, stock may go down, stock may go up, stock may go down. But the end goal, the market as a whole goes up 7 to 10% per year on average, right? And the end goal is for you at least to be able to better yourself in the next 6 months, the next 12 months or 18 months. And these things,
I'd go even longer. Better yourself, think 40 years down the line, 20 years down the line. Don't think 1 year down the line, because, that's, I think, more realistic.
Yeah,
always think long term.
Set the goals that you think are attainable, and set the goals that you think are achievable as well, but also push you to become better. Because sometimes if your goals are too long term, it's like having a paper due in 2 months. I'll wait, I'll do it in a month and a half. Right? So set these goals intermittently as well, if that's what it takes, and set these longer term goals, and that hopefully will help you go forward. Just like in investing for yourself, right? Set your goal for the next 5 years, not for the next 5 days, because that's a bit less realistic. There's a lot of things that are out of your control in the next 5 days. But in the next 5 years, you're able to allocate your money better. You're able to prepare yourself, able to go to the right events, meet the right people, for you to ultimately build a better life. Kosta?
Yeah. Sorry, there we had a little connection. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Do you hear me now? Okay, cool. So yeah, I totally agree there. With that, do you have anything else you want to add? I think we can go on for hours, but we have to wrap it up.
I think that wraps it up on my end.
Great. Me too. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas. I'm sure for someone here can hopefully grasp one of them and run with it. But yeah, with that, thank you everyone for watching and listening to the Money Class podcast. My name is Kosta. And
it was still Marc.
We're still the same people.
As it was 42 minutes ago.
Yeah. We have to think of different outros now. But no, with that being said, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you on another episode. Bye, everyone.
You got it. Take care, guys. This has been episode 15 of the Money Class podcast. If you liked the episode, make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast. We release a new episode every single week. See you guys next week. Bye-bye.